Hello, this is Angela, and you're listening to or watching the podcast, Why You Do What You Do. A podcast that talks about human development and psychology to maybe help you figure out a little more about why you do what you do. And we've been talking about some maladaptive habits that people have. And a maladaptive habit, as we said, was something that decreases the person's chance of thriving or surviving. Little things that can derail your ability to find happiness or to even, keep you from living. So, those are things that you need to watch out for, are things that do not serve you but harm you. And now we're going to be talking about norms. What a society considers acceptable is usually rooted in the survival needs of the individual and of the larger group. And these norms started being decided back in the caveman days. If someone was a danger to themselves and others, they usually got rocked. You could probably know what I mean by that. Rock. The survival of the group was paramount. And any individual who threatened that was exiled, kicked out of the, group, or, checked out permanently. So these norms have been something that started from our beginnings. The resulting standards of behavior, or norms, are typically expressed, taught, and monitored by the society's major institutions: family, church, schools, and government. So, it started out, with the family and then moved on into society to where now, even your government wants to tell you what are acceptable, behaviors. And they're well within the right to do that because there are some behaviors. Basically, like I said, the tail point is if you're a danger to yourself and others, you don't need to be out there hurting other people. That is something that is a good thing in some cases. In some societies, the norms are fairly specific and strict, so that the range of acceptable behaviors is quite narrow. And sometimes that's unfortunate because that doesn't allow for people to be individuals. You have to be a cookie cutter version of everybody else, and you're not allowed to express your individuality because the norm is like this. In other societies, including our own, the norms are less restrictive. And that's for now, here in the good old USA. Our culture currently permits a relatively wide band of behaviors. I was taught whatever you do in your own home, that's your business, nobody else's. For example, it tolerates sexual preferences and activities that would have scandalized our grandparents, and that are today prohibited in some other parts of the world, such as like the third world. There are sex acts that are not allowed and are punishable by severe punishments, even death in some parts of the world. It allows a greater range of political behavior than many other cultures do, for now. But half of our country is now being called the enemy, So that's a little scary. It looks a little like fascism to me when, being, a moderate or liberal person makes you the enemy. And that's dangerous. The roles it prescribes for men and women are fairly flexible. Furthermore, our society is comparatively tolerant of deviation. And like I said, that's for now. There's some bad things happening in our society right now that are looking to stop equality, and that is dangerous. Someone like Arnold, whose behavior differs from the norm in so many respects, is nevertheless encouraged to be a participating member. And everyone should be. If you can be a, functional member of society, then you should be. Everybody's got something to offer unless you really don't. I think people with mental disabilities and mental illness should be encouraged to be members of society. This is not to underestimate the restrictions placed on us by the established norms in our society. What the law allows still may be taboo according to the church. What a textbook says is socially acceptable may not be tolerated in all American homes. And I know that. I've had first experience with that. But personally, I believe it's better to be educated and enlightened and informed than to be ignorant or just obtuse, because you're only hurting yourself and your folks around you if that's the way you think. In addition, we are restricted by the numerous subcultures, each with rules of its own that exist within the general diversity of our culture. And we do have that here in America. We have, up north, we have some, French spillover from French Canada. We have a lot of British and Scottish and Irish inheritances on the, East Coast. We have some French Creole and Hispanic down, in the South and in the Southwest. So we do have subcultures here in the good old USA. Now, that might be changing. I don't know. But, each of these cultures has their own belief system that came from their mother country. And that is what they propagate and teach to their young. And America is supposed to be the great melting pot where all of this comes together, and we become better and stronger for it. But now that's not in vogue, so that's a shame, because I believe that is how our country became the great country that it has become up to a certain point in time, and hopefully it will return to that. The part of the country a person lives in has a strong influence on standards of conduct. Indeed, even the neighborhoods of a single city will vary. And that's like I joke about mine being a den of thieves, because that's just something that happens here. You got to lock everything up, board up your garage windows. There's people who have bars on their windows. I haven't gone that far, but I have very old windows that don't want to open. They got the rope and pulley thing happening, and they're stuck pretty good, most of them. So, and then I have level windows, but we actually caught a woman trying to pull out our level windows. I guess she thought they pulled out instead of, in, and so she was trying to pull them out. And we yelled out, "What are you doing?" Oh, and just took off running. It's like really just in broad daylight. So that's the kind of neighborhood I live in. Socioeconomic class, ethnic background, educational level, and a variety of other factors influence our views of what is normal. And that's true. They have a little graph here talking about educational background and money that people make from the National Institute of Mental Health. The admissions per 100,000 for families making under $3,000 a year, which there are people who make that. I make less than that. 2,000 per 100,000 folks were admitted to mental health facilities. To families making $3 to $49.99 a year, there were probably about 900. Families making $5 to $6.99 a year, there were about 600. 7 to 9.99, there were about 350. $10 to $14,000 a year, there were about 150. And then 15,000 and over, there were only about 100 a year. So it says here the link between social class and mental health is very real. That people in the lower incomes have more of a instance of going into mental health facilities. And the reasons for that could be that being someone who makes under $3,000 a year is pretty stressful. Because you can't really support yourself. And so that leaves you dependent on other people. Or the system, and sometimes the system fails. I know it did in my case. So that is a very stressful thing, and that can make anyone slip into some mental illness, depression, anxiety, antisocial behavior, stealing, and things of that nature. I've never gone quite that far. I'm a verified goody two shoes. That's how I want to be. Everything needs to be above board, because I don't want to let my father and my big brother down on that. So, compare, for instance, the principles expressed in Abby Hoffman's Steal This Book with those in Amy Vanderbilt's Everyday Etiquette. And of course, there's a big difference there. I actually have a couple etiquette books myself. And I came from a grandmother who went to finishing school. She was descended from English nobility. So, she went to finishing school, and she had wanted me to go to finishing school. Mom was like, no, there's no reason for that, but she taught me everything that she learned in finishing school. She had me walking with a book on my head. I can tell you, my son recently, here's an example, went to a wedding, and they had a charger plate. He didn't know what it was. He was going to eat, and the guy was like, no, you don't eat off that plate. You eat off the plate that they're going to put on your plate, or the bowl that they're going to put on your plate. And he didn't know there was a difference. I said, man, I tried to teach you that back when you were a kid, but he didn't remember. I've got gold chargers. My husband at the time was against me teaching the boys etiquette. He was afraid it would make them effeminate. He didn't want that. So, I know all these things. I can tell you what the big fork and the little fork's for, and the spoons, and, what the fork with the little curve outs is for. So I know all of that stuff because my grandmother taught me, because that's what she was taught, and she felt like that was something important to pass on. My other siblings, they didn't care anything about that, but I would stay and listen and learn, and so she did that with me. So, there's a difference from folks who be stealing and folks who are concerned about etiquette. So, now that's not to say there was a crossover. There were several cases of the gentleman bandit, the gentleman, art thief, and, things of that nature. There's crossovers, but in general, there's types of people, and socioeconomic class, ethnic background, and educational level also influence the ways in which people respond to behavior that is considered abnormal. So, people, we've already seen people who make less money are more likely to be committed, and also people who make less money are more likely to be morally ambivalent. And that's a shame to say, but it's true. If you're hungry, you might steal that loaf of bread. Whereas if you got the money to buy your loaf of bread, 9 times out of 10, you're going to go do that. Now, there are incidences with kleptomaniacs and things like that, but, that's out of the norm. And of course, your ethnic background. Like I say, different societies have different standards, and what's okay with one group of folks is not necessarily okay with another group of folks. That's a problem that we work on, hopefully, is understanding each other. That's something that's not in vogue right now, but it should be, because we're stronger together than we are divided. And of course, your educational level. A guy who's working, at McDonald's, might not have such a problem with taking a little extra. And a guy who's a doctor or lawyer might also not have a problem with taking a little extra. But generally, the higher education level, the more understanding of the necessity of morals, and the less need to take more. Now, once you start getting up, there's some people who make a whole lot of money, whose moral ambivalence shows in their dealings, and that can be a problem, because once they become so powerful and so rich, they can be morally, bankrupt, and you can't do a lot about it because they hold all the cards, and that's a problem in society. The, let's see, that is considered abnormal. Socialization. We're all socialized to one extent or another. Our parents started socializing us from the time we were out of the womb, and then the larger family came into play, and then the other kids at school came into play, the teachers, friends came into play, neighbors, people you know, people you worked with, even your pets sometimes come into play. They can get you out of the house and let you social a little more. And, you might learn a little more about, not being so selfish if you got the pets to deal with. So from day one, we start being socialized. Wherever and however we live, we all learn certain behavioral codes as we grow up. A process called socialization. And, when my kids were not in school, we used to take them up to the park, let them play and be around other kids because, I knew that was important and we didn't want them to just have no interaction with other children until they got in school. The norms transmitted to us by our social group reflect its dominant values and long-term concerns. And sometimes that's a problem as well because what one culture sees as a concern, other cultures don't see as a concern. And to the other culture, they're like, wait, what? Well, that's not a thing anymore. Why are you worried about that? But, these things are instilled from the time you're a baby. And once you learn behaviors, it becomes harder to unlearn them or accept other behaviors. So they also provide a framework within which we can develop effective ways to interact with other people. And some people never learn that. They never learn effective ways to interact with other people. We all know people that are like this, and they're just inappropriate and too aggressive, and you're just like you have to deal with them, and you put on the WTF face because you're like, who raised you? Wolves, chimpanzees? What was that about? But some people have problems interacting with other people. And can learn the skills we need for survival and success. Because it's just not all about just surviving. If you're surviving, then, that's a pretty lean way of living. The goal is to succeed. The goal is to, do well at whatever it is, you're doing in life. In addition, we acquire a social conscience. That is, the ability to distinguish right from wrong and to feel at least some distress if we violate the norms. Now, some folks, like, narcissistic sociopaths, do not have that conscious thing. They're all about them, and they're using other people, to get what they want out of life. They don't care about other people. People are pawns, things to use to get what they want. So, there are always exceptions to the norms. There are 5 areas of behavior for which socialization is common in all cultures. Feeding, elimination or toilet training, sexuality, aggression, and independence, excuse me, or the learning to social and emotional skills needed to separate from parents and the childhood environment. Different cultures often establish different norms around these points. And we know that from just, watching people out in society. Different cultures treat their children differently and allow different things and don't allow different things. And, that's something that you can just observe when you're out at a restaurant or out at the mall or somewhere. For example, the taboo against pork and shellfish that is observed in Jewish communities. Some norms are more universal, for instance. The taboo against eating human flesh that is common in most societies. Now, it says most societies because, as we know, up until recently, and even probably some very isolated tribes out in the east and maybe in the south, don't find that to be taboo. But for most of us, that is a taboo that, yeah, no, you don't do that. Youngsters everywhere are taught to recognize and avoid whatever behaviors their society considers inappropriate. Interestingly, these inappropriate behaviors are very often natural impulses. One reason why the socialization process is typically so long and intense. And if you think about nature, like young monkeys or young lions or whatever, a lot of behavior, like our children, is impulsive. But impulsive behaviors can get you killed and can endanger your group. So that's why it's important to teach socialization so that your youngsters understand why these rules are. Like, if your child runs out impulsively into the road, you can snatch them up and spank their booty real quick and tell them, have you seen a dead animal on the road or a dead bug or whatever? That's how you might end up if you keep running out on the road and not looking. This car can run over you and squish you just like it would that bug or that, possum or whatever. Unfortunately, our youngsters see these things on the side of the road. When my kids were very little, me and my husband used to say, oh, they're sleeping beside the road. And the kids would be, oh, that's a bad place. Because we didn't want to have to deal with the death yet, but eventually they're going to have to. So, and that's why you teach them the dangers. Toddlers, for instance, do not distinguish between a right and wrong time, place, or way to eat or to urinate. If adults fail to make this decision, their behavior is likely to be considered abnormal and unacceptable, needless to say, except when you get very old, then that goes back, I know some people who, I used to work at a nursing home for a few years, where, they just stop and let go. So, we start out a certain way, we end up back that way, unfortunately. So, the power of norms is so great that adults who do engage in deviant behavior generally try to keep it secret, and as a result suffer another punishment, anxiety. And now, that's not to say all anxiety is from you doing something wrong. Anxiety can just be a thing, from, confusion, things, a major stressor has hit your life. And then there's also chemical anxiety with, your brain. So, we're not saying that everyone who has anxiety does it because they're bad. So don't even start that. Anxiety may take many forms. A guilty conscience, fear that mom or the police will find out what you did, or fear of going to hell if you believe in that. It can also contribute to a wide range of physical problems, including ulcers. I've had about 14 of those. Migraine headaches, I have those every now and then. Asthma, hypertension, acne, and warts. But anxiety does more than punish us for violating society's rules. It also functions as a preventive measure to restrain us from committing unacceptable acts. So the kid who's like, no, I'm not going to do that, I'm afraid to get in trouble, is the one that's actually more normative than the one who takes the dare or does the thing and hope nobody finds out about it. So, if you got the good kids, be happy with that. That is, just thinking about doing something wrong, violating an important norm, usually generates enough anxiety to keep us from going any further. Now, there are people who unfortunately don't have that. They will do whatever to whoever and they don't care. That's just the way I am. Well, that's a bad way to be. And you shouldn't be that way. So, if you have the little guilt pangs, it's like, well, you know what, I feel like saying or doing this, but I'm not going to do it because that wouldn't be right. Then you're someone whose, anxiety is enough to keep you from doing the thing that is wrong. The role of anxiety in human behavior is too complex to summarize here because, like I said, there's all kinds of anxieties and reasons to have anxiety. But we'll return to the subject later. Of course, anxiety cannot prevent all deviant acts. We wish it could, because then there wouldn't be any. Most of us occasionally overcome our conscience enough to defy social norms, and usually when we're preteens and teenagers, that's the thing. You know you're not supposed to be smoking, but a kid at the bus stop is smoking, so you do it too. Like I said, I took like 2 tokes of marijuana cigarette when I was a teenager, one with a friend at the bus stop and one at a concert, and that's like, I didn't like smoking, and that's the only one I ever did, so, but, when you're a teenager, 16, 17, you know it's not supposed to be drinking, but there's alcohol at the party, so you might take a drink. So, that's usually when most people defy social norms. You're trying to find yourself, you're coming up, you're not a child anymore, but you're not quite an adult, and so you're doing these things as an act of rebellion and to, find out who you are. Do I even like smoking? Do I like drinking? I don't know. So that's usually when our young folks are testing out the boundaries of the social norms. Some people violate norms regularly. Yes, there are people who do this on occasion 24/7. You got your pathological liars, your narcissists, your narcissistic sociopaths, thieves, murderers, rapists. So there are folks who fall to this side of the normal range, who, that's not a problem for them. They have no, conscience niggling at them, or if they do, it's so small, they don't listen to it. Criminals, for instance, blatantly ignore the legal and moral codes that govern aggression. Like I said, if you ever become a person who's just over the top, too aggressive, and you're just like, what the is wrong with you? Because it might be the smallest thing. I've seen people go off in like restaurants or something about, the way change was given, or, they were out of a certain food item that they had wanted, and, there's yelling, screaming, and, road rage is a real thing. My mom used to like cuss at people going down the road, give them the finger. It was funny. But, most of us, try to stay cool, calm, and collected and keep our aggression under wraps, because there's no need for it. It doesn't solve anything, and in fact escalates conflict. So, for most of us, we realize that, and we don't act on our aggressive impulses. Still, even those who scorn society's norms cannot completely escape them, as we know. Usually they accept society's ideas of success, such as wealth, power, and status, though they use deviant means to achieve it. And that's where I was talking about folks who, narcissistic sociopaths who are all out for them, and they'll use anybody else they can, including the American people, to get whatever it is that they want. Many an underworld hitman still goes to church on Sundays, because of course they do. They're good Catholics, so, you got to go to church on Sunday. It doesn't matter what you was doing on Friday and Saturday, does it? What about the individual whose deviant behavior is not directed toward any apparent goal? Because some of it is not. We noted that Elaine, Arnold, and Tommy do not appear to gain anything from their violations of social norms. That's because they are mentally ill, and there is no reward for them in doing these things. Yet the peer pressure, fear of punishment, and conscious pangs that keep most of us in line most of the time have little effect on them. And that's where you start to differ from, just deviant behavior into mental illness, because there's not a clear line. It's a gray area there. But, if there's no goal in a behavior, it's just a repetitive behavior, or, sometimes they call them self-soothing behaviors, but there's no goal. There's no reward. The reward in itself is the repetitive behavior, that it keeps you calm and soothed. So, there are behaviors that aren't dictated by any type of conscious that we know. They neither conceal their abnormal behavior, nor do they enjoy it. as far as anyone can tell. So, like, some folks try to hide being bad, but, it's like the song, you can run on for a long time, but sooner or later, God's going to cut you down. Some criminals enjoy their bad behavior. They like it. I like how I am. I like being me. That's just me. Well, that's a shame for you, because the rest of us don't like it. But, therefore, we conclude their mental processes must differ from ours in some important respect. And they do. They must be what? Mentally ill, emotionally disturbed, crazy. What should we call it? And that's the good question. Now, a lot of people don't seek mental health help, and I hate that because they're afraid to be labeled crazy. I knew a woman, and she had depression and anxiety. She had bipolar, and the only reason she found it is because she went ahead and went. But she was scared to death they were going to call her crazy and put her in an institution. And I said, nothing you've done is that bad. You're not a danger to yourself. You're not a danger to others. You just have these feelings, and you're not dealing with them well. Go talk to somebody. And so she did, and she got tested and everything. And then she ended up on medication in her own home. She didn't get put away. She wasn't crazy. So, there's still too much of a stigma, about mental health. So if you feel like, there is a problem, go talk to a mental health professional. Like I said, if your body's broke, you take care of it. If your mind is broke, you should take care of that too. Just about every area of abnormal psychology involves some controversy or another. And that is true. And certainly one of the most central issues is what to call the people who are its subjects. Because, now we've kind of settled on mentally ill or mentally disabled or whatever. And that's kind of the PC thing. But like I say, in the past, deviance was used. Crazy people was used. It's getting better. And people are starting to understand that these problems are an illness, or, even a birth defect in some cases. So it's getting better, and there's less of a stigma than there used to be. But I still feel like in a lot of areas and a lot of people's families or, cultures, there's still a pretty big stigma about mental illness. And that shouldn't be the case. Like I said, if your body's broke, you get it fixed. If your mind is broke, you should get it fixed too. We have skirted this question so far by emphasizing two things: behavior and social standards. On one hand, we have focused on the idea that these individuals can be identified by their unusual actions, and that's not always the case. There are people, like Jeffrey Dahmer, who seem to be charming, wonderful, perfect people. But underneath that surface, there lives a monster. On the other hand, we have said that what is unusual is a matter of what socialization leads us to expect. And that's true. If you grew up in a society where everyone had to play with a red ball and someone came up with a blue ball, to you that would be abnormal. No, we only play with red balls. Why do you have a blue ball? That's not right. That's abnormal. It's like I say, as far as, clothing, hairstyles, things like that. I decided at a young age, I wasn't going to be dictated to, because there was a lot of mean girls in middle school, and they were like, you have to wear this kind of shirt, you have to wear these pants, you have to wear but I don't even like those, so no, I'm not going to do that. You want to be those little people following each other and doing that, you do that. I'm not doing it. I'm going to be me and wear what I want to wear, what I like. So I had a pretty good, sense of self in middle school. This approach has its limits. In stressing observable behaviors, we neglect unobservable mental and physiological processes, because not everyone, like I said, has abnormal behaviors that they exhibit. The abnormal behaviors are things they don't show the public. So, like I say, you don't know just by looking who has some problems. And that's something you should talk to your children about. is like just because someone seems nice doesn't mean they are nice. They might seem nice out on the street and wherever you know them from, but then they might get you behind closed doors and they may not be so nice. So you need to teach your children, socialize your children to understand that not all smiling faces are happy, nice people. In stressing social criteria, we ignore the role of biological factors, early childhood development, individual learning, and other influences, because everybody grows up different. Everyone has a different experience. Each of us is unique as, a snowflake or a fingerprint, and no two people are the same. Even people who grow up in the same house, even twins, have different experiences of life. So, you can't cookie cutter people and say you should be like this. So there are lots of things that go into the norm. Like I said, nature versus nurture is a big thing people talk about. But how were you raised? What did you learn growing up? Did you pay attention and learn some stuff? Because I always wanted to learn. I know people who they didn't want to learn, didn't want to have anything to do with school, was too happy to get out. Some even dropped out early. And that's a shame, because there's a lot out there that you can learn to help you become a more well-rounded, intelligent person. All approaches deserve attention. Because, like I said, we aren't all cookie-cutter little people, and there are a lot of divisions, a lot of gray areas. This might have caused this might have caused that, but this might have caused this, and this might. You have to go into it as an individual, and that's how your good therapists look at you, as an individual. And that's why they ask you starting out from day, one, what's bothering you, and then when you start getting deeper, they're going to start talking about your family. How was that? And that can be interesting. So, our aim up to this point has been to avoid the negative connotations that often distort discussions of abnormality. Because, like I said, there's still too much stigma. There's still people who think you're crazy if there's any mental abnormality. And that's not the case. And in fact, most of the best geniuses of the world were abnormal people. So, genius itself kind of lets you see, like Solomon. If you look at Solomon's book, it's like vanity, all is vanity. Because he realized that a lot of stuff going on around was pretty much BS. And a lot of people, who are highly intelligent realize that. And it's like, well, okay, I'm just going to do me. Because, yeah. But that's where I'm going to leave you for today. I hope that helped you figure out maybe a little bit more about why you do what you do. If you want to help me out, please like and share this educational program. And that's what it is, an educational program. It is not designed to diagnose or treat any mental illness. And if anything I have talked about has triggered you, or you suspect maybe you have a mental illness, then by all means, please go and see your mental health professional. If you want to help me out, subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you want to help me out even more, go to my Patreon page and become a patron. Thanks for watching or listening. That's all for now. Until next time.